Buddha warned men about this desire. And he was right. I never thought that the most profound warning about masculine suffering would come from a man who lived 2,500 years ago. But when I discovered what Buddha truly said about the one desire that destroys more men than war, poverty, and disease combined, it became clear that his ancient wisdom wasn't just spiritual philosophy. It was a psychological roadmap for understanding why modern men are more depressed, anxious, and spiritually empty than ever before in human history. The story begins not with Buddha's famous teachings about suffering and enlightenment, but with a lesser-known discourse he gave to a group of merchants who had come to him seeking guidance about success and happiness. These were practical men, businessmen and traders, who wanted to know how to achieve prosperity and satisfaction in their worldly lives. Buddha's response would become one of his most important but least understood teachings about the nature of masculine desire and its consequences. Buddha looked at these ambitious men and said something that initially confused them. Of all the desires that bind men to suffering, none is more seductive, more persistent, or more destructive than the desire to be desired by others. This craving for external validation will consume your peace, corrupt your judgment, and lead you away from every source of genuine happiness and strength. The merchants were puzzled. They had expected Buddha to warn them about greed for money, lust for women, or hunger for power. Instead, he was identifying something more subtle, but infinitely more dangerous: the deep masculine need to be admired, respected, and validated by others. This wasn't just about ego or vanity. Buddha was pointing to a fundamental flaw in how men constructed their sense of self-worth and identity. Buddha explained that this desire to be desired manifested in countless ways throughout a man's life. In youth, it drove the need to appear strong, brave, and impressive to peers. In adulthood, it morphed into the compulsion to achieve status, accumulate wealth, and gain recognition for accomplishments. In old age, it became the desperate attempt to leave a legacy, to be remembered and honored after death. Watch how men behave when they believe they are being observed versus when they believe they are alone, Buddha told the merchants. The difference reveals the extent to which their actions are motivated not by inner wisdom or genuine care for others, but by the insatiable hunger to control how others perceive them. This observation was devastatingly accurate. Buddha had identified the root cause of what we might now call the masculine performance complex, the exhausting lifelong effort to maintain an image that would earn external validation. This performance required men to suppress their authentic selves, ignore their genuine needs, and make decisions based not on wisdom or compassion, but on what would enhance their reputation and status. The psychological insight was revolutionary. Buddha recognized that men's apparent strength and confidence were often elaborate facades, designed to hide deep insecurity about their worth. The very behaviors that society celebrated as masculine virtues, ambition, competitiveness, emotional stoicism, were frequently symptoms of this underlying craving for external validation rather than expressions of genuine strength. Buddha warned that this desire created a vicious cycle of suffering. The more a man oriented his life around gaining others' approval, the more dependent he became on external circumstances for his sense of well-being. Success brought temporary satisfaction, but it was always followed by anxiety about maintaining that success and achieving even greater recognition. Failure brought not just disappointment, but a crushing sense that his very identity was threatened. A man who lives for others' approval becomes a slave to their opinions, Buddha explained. He cannot act according to his conscience because he must always consider how his actions will be perceived. He cannot pursue his genuine interests because he must pursue what others will admire. He cannot even know his own mind because it has become a mirror reflecting others' expectations rather than a lamp illuminating his own truth. The merchants began to understand why Buddha considered this desire so dangerous. It wasn't just that it caused suffering. It prevented men from developing the inner resources that could provide lasting happiness and strength. When a man's sense of worth depended on external validation, he never learned to validate himself. When his identity was built on others' perceptions, he never discovered his authentic self. Have you ever noticed how the men who seem most desperate to prove their worth are often the ones who doubt it most deeply? Buddha described how this craving for external validation distorted every aspect of a man's life. In relationships, it prevented genuine intimacy because the man was more concerned with being admired than with truly connecting. He would present a curated version of himself, designed to impress rather than revealing his authentic thoughts, feelings, and vulnerabilities. In work and career, this desire led men to pursue achievements that looked impressive to others rather than pursuing work that aligned with their values and brought them genuine satisfaction. They would climb ladders that were leaning against the wrong walls, achieving success that felt hollow because it was motivated by others' expectations rather than their own vision. In spiritual matters, the desire for external validation became perhaps most toxic. Buddha observed how men would adopt religious practices, philosophical positions, and moral stances, not because they genuinely believed in them, but because these positions enhanced their reputation for wisdom, righteousness, or spiritual advancement. The man who meditates to be seen as spiritual, who gives to charity to be seen as generous, who speaks wisdom to be seen as enlightened, has corrupted every practice that could genuinely transform him, Buddha taught. He has turned the very tools of liberation into instruments of bondage. This insight explained why so many seemingly successful men were profoundly unhappy. They had achieved everything that society told them would bring satisfaction, wealth, status, recognition, power. But because these achievements were motivated by the desire for external validation rather than authentic personal fulfillment, they provided no lasting peace or joy. Buddha also recognized how this masculine craving for validation created broader social problems. Men competing for limited recognition and status inevitably saw other men as threats rather than allies. This prevented the formation of genuine friendships and collaborative relationships that could provide mutual support and wisdom. The competition for external validation also led to the exploitation and manipulation of others. When a man's primary goal was to appear successful and admirable, he was tempted to use other people as props in his performance, rather than treating them as fellow human beings deserving of respect and consideration. Buddha observed that this dynamic was particularly destructive in men's relationships with women. Instead of seeking partnership based on mutual respect and genuine affection, men driven by the need for validation would pursue women who enhanced their status or provided them with admiration and ego gratification. A man who seeks a woman to validate his worth rather than to share genuine love will find neither validation nor love, Buddha warned. He will constantly demand from her what only he can give himself, the assurance that he is valuable and worthy of respect. This created relationships built on performance and transaction rather than authentic connection. The man would present an idealized version of himself to win the woman's admiration, then exhaust himself trying to maintain that facade. Meanwhile, he would value the woman not for who she truly was, but for how her attention and affection made him feel about himself. Buddha's teachings revealed that this pattern was not only harmful to the individuals involved, but contributed to broader social dysfunction. When men were primarily motivated by the desire for external validation, they became unreliable as leaders, partners, and community members because their actions were dictated by ego rather than wisdom or genuine care for others. The Buddha's warning extended to how this desire affected men's relationship with material possessions. He observed that men would accumulate wealth, luxury goods, and status symbols, not because these things provided genuine utility or pleasure, but because they served as external markers of success that could earn admiration and envy from others. Watch a man with his possessions when he believes he is unobserved, Buddha suggested, and you will see how little joy they actually bring him. But watch him display those same possessions to others, and you will see how desperately he needs their recognition to feel any satisfaction at all. This insight explained the modern phenomenon of conspicuous consumption and the endless pursuit of lifestyle upgrades that never seem to provide lasting satisfaction. Men were trapped in a cycle of acquiring things they didn't actually want in order to impress people whose opinions shouldn't matter to them. Do you recognize this pattern in your own life or in the lives of men around you? The exhausting effort to maintain an image that brings recognition but not genuine fulfillment. Buddha also warned about how the desire for external validation affected men's relationship with their own emotions and vulnerabilities. Because society typically respected men who appeared strong, stoic, and in control, men learned to suppress or hide any feelings that might undermine this image. A man who cannot acknowledge his fears, doubts, and sorrows because he fears losing others' respect will never develop the emotional wisdom necessary for true strength, Buddha taught. He becomes brittle rather than resilient, isolated rather than connected, and weak rather than strong. This emotional suppression didn't eliminate difficult feelings. It simply drove them underground, where they could manifest as anger, addiction, depression, or other destructive behaviors. Men who couldn't afford to appear vulnerable became actually vulnerable in ways that were far more dangerous than the temporary discomfort of acknowledging their humanity. Buddha recognized that this dynamic was particularly tragic because the very things men were trying to hide, their struggles, uncertainties, and emotional depth, were often what made them most relatable and genuinely admirable to others. The performance of invulnerability not only failed to earn lasting respect, but prevented the authentic connections that could provide real support and validation. The Buddha's solution to this destructive pattern was characteristically profound and practical. He didn't simply tell men to stop seeking validation. He understood that this desire arose from a deeper spiritual ignorance about the nature of self and identity. The man who seeks validation from others does so because he does not understand his own true nature, Buddha explained. He believes he is a separate, isolated ego that must prove its worth to survive and thrive. But this ego is an illusion. Your true nature is already complete, already worthy, already connected to all life. This teaching pointed toward a fundamental shift in how men could understand themselves and their place in the world. Instead of seeing themselves as isolated individuals who must compete for limited resources and recognition, they could recognize their interconnectedness with all life and find their value in their capacity to contribute to the well-being of. The whole Buddha taught that when a man truly understood his interconnected nature, the compulsive need for external validation naturally dissolved. He no longer needed others to confirm his worth because he experienced his value directly through his connections and contributions. His sense of self became rooted in something stable and unshakable rather than dependent on the changing opinions of others. This didn't mean becoming indifferent to others or rejecting all social connection. Rather, it meant engaging with others from a place of genuine care and service rather than from a desperate need for their approval. Relationships became opportunities for mutual growth and support rather than competitions for validation. Buddha described the transformation that occurred when men freed themselves from the tyranny of others' opinions. Such a man can act according to his conscience without fear. He can pursue his genuine interests without shame. He can form authentic relationships without pretense. He can face failure without despair and success without arrogance. He becomes truly free. This freedom wasn't just psychological, but spiritual. When a man was no longer enslaved by the need for external validation, he could turn his attention inward and discover the profound peace and joy that were his birthright. He could develop genuine wisdom rather than the appearance of wisdom, genuine strength rather than the performance of strength. Buddha also taught that men who had freed themselves from this destructive desire became better leaders, partners, and community members. Because their actions were motivated by wisdom and compassion rather than ego, they could make decisions that truly served the greater good. Because they didn't need to maintain a facade, they could be authentic and trustworthy in their relationships. The practical applications of Buddha's teaching were extensive. He encouraged men to regularly examine their motivations. Are you pursuing this goal because it aligns with your values and brings you genuine satisfaction, or because you hope it will impress others? Are you making this decision based on wisdom and compassion, or based on how you think it will affect your reputation? Buddha also recommended practices that could help men develop inner stability and self-validation: meditation, self-reflection, service to others, And the cultivation of virtues like compassion and wisdom could all help a man discover his inherent worth and reduce his dependence on external validation. Perhaps most importantly, Buddha taught that this transformation was not only possible, but essential for genuine happiness and spiritual development. A man who remains enslaved by others' opinions will never know peace, he warned. But a man who discovers his true nature and lives from that understanding will find a joy and strength that no external circumstance can disturb. What would change in your life if you could act purely from your own authentic values and wisdom, without concern for how others might judge or perceive you? The relevance of Buddha's 2,500-year-old warning to contemporary men is striking and urgent. Modern society has created unprecedented opportunities for men to seek external validation through social media, professional achievement, material accumulation, and status competition. The very technologies and systems that promise connection and success have often intensified the suffering that Buddha identified. Social media platforms are specifically designed to exploit the human craving for validation, providing endless opportunities for men to curate their image and seek approval through likes, comments, and shares. The instant feedback loop of digital validation can become addictive, creating a constant state of anxiety about online reputation and image management. Professional environments often reward the appearance of competence and confidence over genuine wisdom and collaboration, encouraging men to prioritize looking successful over being effective. The modern economy's emphasis on personal branding and self-promotion has made the performance of excellence more valuable than excellence itself. Consumer culture continuously sends the message that a man's worth can be measured by his possessions, achievements, and lifestyle choices. Advertising specifically targets masculine insecurity, promising that the right car, clothes, or gadgets will finally earn the respect and admiration that men crave. Yet Buddha's warning also points toward hope and liberation. Understanding the futility and destructiveness of seeking external validation can be the first step toward discovering more sustainable sources of well-being and meaning. Men who recognize this pattern in their own lives can begin the work of developing inner stability and authentic self-worth. The path forward isn't about rejecting all ambition or becoming indifferent to others' well-being. Rather, it's about shifting the source of motivation from external validation to internal wisdom and genuine care for others. It's about learning to value character over reputation, service over status, and authenticity over appearance. Buddha's teaching also suggests that men's liberation from this destructive desire would benefit not just individual men, but society as a whole. When men are no longer driven by the compulsive need for validation, they can become more collaborative, more honest, more emotionally available, and more focused on creating genuine value rather than just appearing successful. The businesses, families, communities, and institutions led by such men would likely be more sustainable, more ethical, and more supportive of human flourishing. Instead of being driven by ego and competition, they would be guided by wisdom and genuine concern for collective well-being. Modern research in psychology and neuroscience has largely confirmed Buddha's insights about the relationship between external validation and mental health. Studies consistently show that people whose self-worth depends heavily on others' approval are more likely to experience anxiety, depression, and relationship problems. Conversely, research on what psychologists call intrinsic motivation demonstrates that people who are driven by internal satisfaction, personal growth, and meaningful contribution tend to be happier, more resilient, and more successful in the long term. This aligns perfectly with Buddha's teaching that men must find their worth within themselves, rather than seeking it from others. The mindfulness and meditation practices that Buddha recommended have also been validated by contemporary research as effective methods for reducing anxiety, increasing emotional regulation, and developing greater self-awareness and inner stability. As we reflect on Buddha's ancient warning about the desire that destroys men's peace and potential, it becomes clear that his wisdom is not just historically interesting, but urgently relevant to contemporary challenges. The same craving for external validation that caused suffering in ancient India is causing even greater suffering in our hyper-connected, image-obsessed modern world. But Buddha's teaching also offers hope. The prison of others' opinions is not inescapable. The performance of masculinity is not mandatory. The exhausting quest for external validation can be abandoned in favor of a more sustainable and satisfying path toward genuine strength and peace. The man who heeds Buddha's warning and turns away from the futile pursuit of others' approval opens himself to possibilities that validation-seeking men cannot even imagine. He discovers that true strength comes from inner stability rather than external recognition. He learns that authentic confidence doesn't require others' confirmation. He finds that genuine happiness arises from being true to his own nature rather than trying to impress others. If this exploration of Buddha's warning about masculine desire has resonated with your own experience or observations, I encourage you to share your thoughts in the comments below. Have you recognized the pattern of validation seeking in your own life? What practices or insights have helped you develop more inner stability and authentic self-worth? And please, if this content has offered you new perspectives on the nature of desire, authenticity, and genuine strength, don't forget to like this video and subscribe to the channel. By sharing these timeless teachings and their modern applications, we can help more people discover the path from external validation to inner freedom. Buddha's warning about the desire to be desired wasn't meant to discourage men from all ambition or achievement. It was meant to free them from the exhausting performance of trying to earn their worth through others' approval. When a man no longer needs external validation to feel valuable, he becomes free to pursue goals that genuinely matter to him, to form relationships based on authentic connection rather than ego gratification, and to contribute to the world from a place of genuine wisdom and compassion. The desire that Buddha warned about has indeed proven destructive across millennia and cultures. But his teaching also points toward the possibility of liberation, not just for individual men, but for all the people whose lives are touched by men who have learned to find their strength, worth, and purpose from within. Because at the end of the day, the man who no longer needs others to validate his worth is free to become who he truly is, and that authenticity is far more powerful and attractive than any performance could ever be.